In this video I want to introduce a thing called DeFOSPAM, which has a silly name, but at least it's kind of memorable. It's a mnemonic of 7 activities you can use to find defects in your requirements, to find discrepancies, gaps, ambiguities and so on. It's not just about finding defects though, it's also about extracting information from your requirements or gherkin stories which can be used as examples. Now the first question is, I've talked about challenging, but how do we challenge our sources of knowledge? Well, we know requirements are always a problem, but how do we test a requirement? The usual tools we have are reviews and inspections, but that covers 100 different sorts of activities you can do in your mind to find defects, in particular with documentation. Now what is DeFOSPAM? It's a simple structured process to assess narrative requirements or gherkin stories or both. And what can we do with AI is we can ask AI to use that technique, with suitable instructions. If you like a process to follow, we can use AI to use that technique to challenge our sources of knowledge. Now I asked Claude.ai what it thought of the whole idea of DeFOSPAM, and it was very positive, I have to say. But there's no surprise there. LLMs like all ideas when you offer them. I asked what it understood about DeFOSPAM, and it said DeFOSPAM is a 7-step requirements validation technique that uses business stories and scenarios to challenge and improve requirements. Now in the paper that I uploaded, it does talk primarily about gherkin stories, but the same approach applies to narrative requirements, and it suggests that it understands what that DeFOSPAM process is. Now Claude may think it's a good idea, but let's just see what that idea could be. If you were reviewing requirements or gherkin stories, what kind of questions might you ask? Well, I think the first would be, have we defined all the important terms? What features can we identify from the requirement, from the stories or from the narrative text? What outcomes can we identify? What scenarios trigger or cause those outcomes? Can we predict outcomes from the requirements? Do scenario outcome pairs conflict, or are they ambiguous? Finally, is there anything missing? These are the 7 question types you would ask, and in sequence, if you use the mnemonic. Now I want to talk about the relationship between what you might call narrative text requirements as opposed to gherkin stories in a structured, domain-specific language. Firstly, requirements should set out what features are required and what those features actually do. Secondly, the rules those features obey that define how the system responds to different inputs or different scenarios. So that's requirements. Gherkin stories, or I might call them business stories, firstly, they provide a kind of mission for a feature. This takes the form of as a role, I want to achieve something so that some goal is achieved. This is the story header, I would put it. Usually the story then presents a set of scenarios. These are examples of the feature in action. Gherkin story scenarios provide examples of the behaviour that we would infer from a narrative text requirement. These examples are really useful because we can feed them back to our sources of knowledge and say, have I understood this requirement correctly? So we can use the gherkin format as like a test case for the requirement. These are the challenges suggested in the new model. Of course, these scenarios can be used by tools like Cucumber for test automation later on, but that's not our concern right now. Stories are useful to illustrate and challenge people's thinking, not just to generate interesting test cases for tests. DeFOSPAM is essentially a 7-step approach to testing requirements and stories. Now I'm going to talk specifically about gherkin-style stories and scenarios, but you can use the same thinking for regular narrative requirements. The first step is we identify terms used in the text and define those terms. By terms, I mean terms that are important, significant. Examples would be customer order, order quantity, validation rules, and so on. Then we identify distinct features. We should expect each gherkin story describes one feature. Next we look for feature outcomes. These are the things the feature actually does. When we look for scenarios that trigger each of those outcomes, These are scenario outcome pairs. Each scenario should only ever trigger one outcome. Conversely, the requirement should provide information to predict the outcome of any scenario you can think of. Are there any ambiguities in the requirement? That is, could the same scenario trigger two different outcomes? Finally, is there anything missing? Maybe you need another feature to define, or more scenarios that example input validation or change new feature outcomes experienced by the user. The DeFOSPAM steps build on each other to some degree, but each one focuses on one aspect of our requirements. Now you might ask how you use AI to review a requirement or Gherkin story with a prompt. So I asked Claude to give me a prompt that used a prepared description of the DeFOSPAM approach to instruct it how to challenge a Gherkin story. This technique of using AI to generate comprehensive prompts is incredibly valuable and saves an awful lot of time. You can see the prompt I used to generate a new prompt to generate prompts for each of the 7 DeFOSPAM checks. I'm generating all 7 prompts in one go here for the sake of simplicity, but I would recommend you customize 7 distinct prompts to generate the full prompts so that you have better control over the output. Now, I'm going to walk through some of the generated documentation and some of the outcomes of these prompts. All of this material is available via a link to Google Drive, a Google Drive directory. You can use the QR code or this link at the bottom, bit.ly/pg-atd-2025. Okay, so I'm going to show you a series of files that have been uploaded to Google Drive and is available through that QR code I just showed you. There are 5 documents that I want to show you now, not in that order, but you can see that they're there already. This is the first video already uploaded, and the video I'm recording right now will appear in this list as well as the third video, which I'll create in a moment. So let me just get rid of that. The first document I want to show you is a document which describes the DeFOSPAM approach. It's a few pages long, I think it's 8 pages long, about 3,000 words, and it describes the background to why it's a valuable thing to do, but also describes the method itself. Now this is what I put to Claude, and Claude appears to understand it and appears capable of following the process. So this is what I'm using as the definition of the approach that I want the AI to use to evaluate requirements and stories. So let us close that one. The next one is the output of the prompt that I showed you a few minutes ago, where I was asking Claude to create prompts for each of the 7 steps in the DeFOSPAM approach. Now, this is the output it came up with. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Essentially, it comes up with a generic context and scoping kind of section, which basically is something for me to fill in. So it says business context, primary users roles, this key users roles, what goals does the what business problem does this solve, key stakeholders, technical context, what other systems does this feature interact with, known limitations, patterns, conventions to follow, key entities and relationships. Now these are potentially global for the whole application, but they're required in order to understand the context of the terminology used in narrative text requirements or a Gherkin story. The principle is this, is that you provide a list of already defined terms, and here are some examples that you can see. It also talks about non-functional requirements to consider. Again, that's out of scope for today. I haven't got time to talk about that. And maybe there's additional analysis required. So, for example, generating an entity relationship validation. So potentially, if we provide an entity model, it could validate the text of a requirement against that entity model, or vice versa. It could generate the entity model potentially. Specific checks to perform, these might be business checks, reconciliations, that kind of thing. Check GDPR compliance with personal data, and so on. It can additionally add these checks. So there's a lot more that beyond the regular DeFOSPAM that Claude could add to this. Now this is what happens next. Is this is the first of the 7 sub-prompts, let's call it, that executes the first step in the DeFOSPAM approach. So you can see the second one is features. So this is the first one, this is the scope of it. This is the prompt. So essentially you can see it's identify all nouns and verbs, check terminology consistency. So it's doing a checking of consistency of the language that is actually used. Identify missing definitions, check for implicit domain concepts. So business concepts referenced but not explained. So again, you could say these are definitions potentially, but they might be whole documents that need to be referenced. Highlight definition-related risks. So where might stakeholders have different understandings? So it looks into the language to suggest that different perspectives might come up with different definitions, and so there'll be conflicts there. Some specific checks which you can add to the prompt, and then the output. The terms used, defined or undefined, consistency issues, and I'm going to show you an example of this prompt being used, okay? But you've got this kind of overall context definition, and then for each of the 7 steps, you've got the context definition plus the specific prompt for that step, if that makes sense. So you'd have to edit these prompts out of this template. So let's get rid of that one. So I'm going to use a sample story, if I can maximize this. So this feature is called update order, and you can see it's got a name, the feature has a name. As a registered customer, I want to update my existing orders so that I can make necessary changes before the order is processed. Okay, so that's the as a, I want, so that. There's some background, and these are givens that exist for all scenarios. And then the scenarios are labelled in this example. So here's the first scenario, and you've got given, when, then, and as usual, there are, how many? 10 scenarios here. There are also some notes added as comments at the end of the story. So these are references to the source of this story, because I actually got this generated by OpenAI, ChatGPT as it happens. So that's the story we're going to work on. So I'll get rid of that. So the next thing is the actual prompt I used to scan that story for the terminology, the terms that need definition, and so on and so forth. And it's going to do a lot of other checks as well, built in, which is tremendous, really, as a freebie. So here's the prompt, but you'll see that the actual story is added to, it's part of the prompt. Now we could do the whole RAG approach and upload the prompt and the story to be analysed as separate files. We could RAG them in that respect. But you can see that it's quite a comprehensive thing. I've not really changed this very much. I've just reused it almost as it was generated by Claude. So that's the prompt to get definitions out of that story. And then here is the response. So it's called it definitions analysis. I should have said these hashes and so on asterisks, whatever, are header levels in standard markup. So when presented on the screen inside the chat interface, these would all be highlighted and formatted based on the markup. So you can see there's a whole lot of nouns extracted, undefined. This is the first time I've run it, so there's nothing defined. Order status values, stock level, and there are some defined there because they were added as examples in the original prompt. Verbs, a whole lot of verbs. Now interestingly, there are some interesting inconsistencies in the content and the use of certain language. So the word order is used as a verb and a noun, I expect. I've not looked at this in detail, I have to say. Then there's update versus change versus modify versus edit. Now there's inconsistent use for possibly the same process, but these might be different processes. Who knows? Total price versus order total. Are they the same thing or not? Who knows? Confirmation versus notification. Again, discrepancies there. And so it goes on. And this is all kind of looks like, you know, good stuff and opportunities to improve the situation. Now, of course, as you run this iteratively, the number of warnings would reduce as you fix the problems. And that's kind of the way it would be used. It's an iterative activity. So that is that. And I'll stop there.